I'm very happy to say that the director of Last Days in Vietnam is here with us tonight. And so if you'll please join me in welcoming to the stage, Rory Kennedy.
Why did I decide to make this movie? I've always been really fascinated by the Vietnam War, and I felt that looking back on these final days of the war, that there may be some insights that we could glean from that and help better understand our efforts today to get out of Iraq and Afghanistan. I started developing this film about 2 years ago, so we were right at the brink of getting out of Iraq and Afghanistan at that point. We're also nearing the 40th anniversary of the fall of Saigon this April. And so I felt that there would be, an opportunity and there would be greater interest in looking back at the anniversary. And also, it's a good time to interview people, and people are still around and young enough to reflect on these events, but maybe have enough distance to also have it be a little bit more balanced and maybe less emotionally driven. One of the insights I would say is that by April 1975, I feel like there were very few good options available to the United States government, and what that tells me is that the moment where you really are in a position to make strategic choices is the choice of getting into a war in the first place. And once you go down that path, it's easy to lose control. And so, we actually premiered this film in Washington, D.C. It had the film has gone to theaters nationwide. It was supposed to go to 10 theaters. It's now been in probably 120 theaters, which has been fantastic, and it was in D.C. for about 6 weeks. And the night we premiered it there, Obama gave his ISIS speech about taking on ISIS, and there was a real palpable sense in the room of the connection between the events of these films and what we were dealing with today. I think, my hope also is that people see this film and it reminds us of the human cost of war, because I think that also often gets lost in the debate and the discussions. And, I think it raises important questions about our responsibilities to the people on the ground. We left Saigon, the United States, and we went back to our homes and our, merry little lives, but the damn FAMs of the world, he spent 13 years in a Reeducation camp, and Bin Pho spent, a year and then struggled to get out of the country for 5 years. So, they're the people who are left behind, and what is our responsibility to them, and what happens when we leave. And, it seems like a logical thing to take on ISIS, but what is our end goal, and what is going to happen when we leave, and who's going to fill in that void? And so I think those questions, I hope, are questions that when people watch this film, they ask. With the footage on the USS Kirk, we got lucky with that, where I was doing there was a guy who I had met named Jan Herman, who worked at the U.S. Navy, their historical preservation unit. And I had invited him to a screening of my previous film, Ethel, because I wanted to get to know him, and I was interested in maybe interviewing him for this film. And so I was talking to him and saying that I really wanted to profile the USS Kirk in the documentary, and we were still developing it. And he came up to me about 20 minutes later at the party, and he said, I was just thinking that I had this conversation about 4 months ago with a sailor who was on the USS Kirk, and he told me how he had gone up into his attic and came across a box of Super 8 undeveloped footage from the Kirk in 1975. Would you have any interest in that? And so I said, yes, I'd have a lot of interest in that. And I called the guy at 9 o'clock the next morning, and I was then back on the West Coast, and I asked him to, if he would be willing to FedEx it out, and he was very protective of it, which is understandable. And so I ended up sending him an airplane ticket and flying him out to California, and we developed it, and it was a treasure trove. So a lot of the footage that you see in our film of the Helicopters being thrown over the ships is his footage. The Chinook story is his footage. All of the sequence of the Armitage ships that are out at sea that are full with Vietnamese at the end of the film, I think it's a very moving moment. That's all his footage, the flag going up and down. And otherwise, it was mostly, the archive came from ABC, NBC, CBS.
There's a lot more story after the last helicopter took off. And I just want to answer the director question is, so I moved on and went to all struggling. And I always afraid of companies, even when I was young. I never hold a gun in my life, and I want to study really hard so I don't have to get drafted to go to the military. So I definitely want to get out, and I didn't get out. So people say that sometimes to conquer your fear, the best way to do it is to live with it, and I did. So after that, and I got out, and I went to America and go to college and have a job and got married and have a kid, just like any American here. It's a very happy life, and I do my artwork. There's a lot of artwork, and I wrote my biography books. And one day, that one of my colleagues and somehow come up with the idea, write a script for my book, and he asked me about that captain that in charge of that evacuation. And I don't have his name in my book because I didn't remember his name at that time. Remember, I'm only 19 years old, so I'm very, at that time I don't think anybody's name was important at that time. And he Googled it, and it come out as Stuart Harrington, which is the main character in the movie. So, so he gave me Stuart numbers and an email address, and it took me a few weeks before I decided to call him. And of course, very emotional between him and I and I make a first phone call because he's the one that made me the promise that get me out, right? And then he asked me to see maybe the guy named Kevin McAllister that can call me and ask me about this movie. And I was hesitant at first, but later on I said, well, I feel good about it because those 4 years is probably the worst day in my life, but it turned out to be a best year of my life because it taught me so much to become who I am today. I always thinking about if you don't live through the hard time, you don't know how good you have right now. And I can guarantee you, in this room, I probably enjoy America the most. Because I know what it's like when you don't have your freedom. So, and I told Stuart that, I will do it. So, and Rory fly me to California and interview me, and I have no idea what I'm talking about, really. She just asked questions, I just answered, and put together just beautifully. And sometimes it's hard to live back in that bad memory, but for me, I think it's a good thing.
This film premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, and it was the first time any of us had seen it, and about 12 people who were in the film came to that festival, and they all came up afterwards, including Bin Pho and Stuart Harrington, who were on stage, and during the course of the questions, Stuart Harrington talked about how he lived in fear every day of running into one of the 420 people that he left behind, and he talked about this moment in a very emotional way, and then Bin took the microphone away from him and he said, I forgive you, Stu. And then it was a very sweet moment. There wasn't a dry eye in the house, but then I was with Bin about a month ago. We had the premiere in LA, and Stuart Harrington was supposed to come, and Bin was, the three of us were going to be there, but it got a little complicated with Stuart, and so we couldn't make it. And somebody asked a similar question there, and Bin said, of course, Stuart was supposed to be here tonight, but I'm used to him not showing up when he...
I was in Reeducation camp. It kind of fancy word for labor prison. That camp, it make prison in America look like a clubhouse. So and they very particular protective with the MIA, and I can tell you for certain that they do have a lot of American in prison, but sometimes I come across them by a very special moment because we just trading camp. Because they move us around a lot. We never stay in one place very long. And I can recognize it, but very brief moment. So I can just tell you it's true, but the quantity, we have no idea. And they very good at make people disappear. I do have one uncle that tried to escape, and he never show up again. So my aunt never find him. So those are things that they do their best. I came back to visit Vietnam in 2000, which is way before this film had been made. So, but recently I have not been back there. But there's many Vietnamese watching this movie already. So, and I'm very sure that including the communists.
And I would say, I think this might be our last question, but in my experience, that there are a lot of younger Vietnamese who go back to Vietnam who are Americans, and they often go back, but there's still a lot of fear for the older generations of Vietnamese in this country to return back to Vietnam. And I would also add that our hope is to one day bring this film to Vietnam, but it's politically complicated. So it is our hope. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you coming out today, and thank you for staying for the Q&A. Thank you.